So, have you ever heard of someone who was so brilliant they could save an entire civilization, but so reckless they could bring it to its knees? Well, let's talk about one of ancient history's most complicated, dazzling, and honestly dangerous figures, Alcibiades. He was the man who was supposed to be Athens' greatest hope and ended up being its ultimate downfall.
I mean, just listen to this quote from the playwright Aristophanes. He just hits the nail on the head. Athens couldn't live with the guy, but they were terrified they couldn't win without him. It really makes you wonder, right? How does one man inspire that much love and that much hate, all at the same time?
Okay, so let's start at the beginning with his meteoric rise. Alcibiades was basically born with a silver spoon in his mouth, into a world of incredible privilege. And that path, well, it set him up for both greatness and a whole lot of trouble right from the get-go. He had these two incredible competing influences in his life. On one side, he's this aristocrat being raised in the house of the legendary statesman Pericles, so he's surrounded by power, by ambition. But on the other side, his mentor is the philosopher Socrates, who's constantly trying to pull this brilliant kid toward a life of virtue. Yeah, about that virtue, it didn't always stick. The guy was famously wild. I mean, he once punched a super powerful man just to make a point. He physically carried his own wife out of a courthouse to stop her from divorcing him. And get this, he entered 7 chariot teams in the Olympics. Nobody did that. It was just an insane flex. His arrogance was honestly as legendary as his talent. And here's the thing. Athens couldn't get enough of him. Despite all that, when he stood up to speak, people were just captivated. His charm, his intellect, it was all off the charts. He rocketed to the top of Athenian politics. And that's what set the stage for his biggest, most audacious plan ever.
All this ambition, all this talent, it all boils down to one single colossal gamble. A decision that would change the entire course of the Peloponnesian War, the invasion of Sicily.
So what exactly was this expedition? You can think of it as Athens' moonshot. It was this huge, unbelievably risky plan to sail across the sea and conquer Syracuse, the most powerful city in Sicily. The goal was pretty straightforward: grow the empire and get filthy rich. The execution, though, well, that was going to be anything but simple.
And the city was completely torn over it. You had the cautious, respected General Nicias on one side, basically saying, guys, hold on, this is too far, too expensive, too dangerous. But then you had Alcibiades. He argued that empires have to expand or they die, famously saying something like, if we stop ruling others, we're going to end up being ruled ourselves. And in the end, his charisma won the argument.
But then, right before this massive fleet set sail, disaster strikes. Religious statues all across Athens are vandalized overnight. And who's the prime suspect? Of course, it's Alcibiades, the guy known for his wild parties and lack of piety. His political enemies saw their chance and they pounced. So, instead of facing a trial he was sure was rigged, he fled, abandoning the very invasion he had championed. And this, right here, is where the story goes from wild to absolutely unbelievable. The celebrated Athenian general, the champion of the people, he doesn't just go into hiding. No, he goes straight to the enemy.
And he immediately puts his brilliant strategic mind to work for them. He gives Athens' mortal enemy, Sparta, a complete masterclass on how to tear his own city apart. He tells them exactly how to help Syracuse, how to choke Athens off from its own farms by building a permanent fort right outside the city walls, and how to start picking off Athens' allies one by one. And every single piece of advice worked perfectly. It was devastating.
You see, his loyalty was pretty much a revolving door. It only ever pointed to himself. He starts in Athens, then flees to Sparta. And then, after he supposedly has an affair with the Spartan queen, you can't make this stuff up, he has to flee again, this time to Persia, who happened to be funding Sparta. And in the Persian court, he starts playing a whole new game of 4D chess. He tells the local governor, a guy named Tissaphernes, hey, you know what you should do? Bleed both sides dry. He argued that if Athens and Sparta just kept fighting a long, grinding war, they'd both end up weak, making them easy for Persia to deal with later. It was cynical, for sure, but absolutely brilliant. Meanwhile, back in Athens, things were a complete disaster. The Sicilian expedition was one of the worst catastrophes in military history. So defeated and desperate, the Athenians do the unthinkable. They ask the very traitor who helped cripple them to please come back and save them. And what was the key to his big comeback? It was this bad boy right here, the Athenian trireme. Think of this thing as the fighter jet of the ancient world.
It was light, incredibly fast, and built around a massive bronze ram on the front. It was a weapon that rewarded bold, unpredictable tactics, which was Alcibiades to a T.
And once he was back in command, he was just on fire. He led the Athenian navy on one of the greatest winning streaks you'll ever read about. At Abydos, he shows up late to the battle like a hero in a movie and snatches victory from the jaws of defeat. At Cyzicus, he sets this incredible trap that completely wipes the Spartan fleet off the map. He was saving Athens from starvation by retaking vital cities. He was unstoppable.
If you want to know just how total his victory was, you just have to read this message the Athenians intercepted from the Spartans after that battle. It's one of the most famous dispatches in all of military history. It's just pure, hopeless despair. Sparta was so broken by this that they actually tried to surrender and end the war right then.
So he sails back into Athens, not as a traitor, but as the city's savior. The people went absolutely wild. All the old charges were dropped, he got his property back, and they basically handed him the keys to the kingdom, supreme command of the entire war effort. He was at the absolute peak of his power.
But you know what they say, the higher you climb, the harder you fall. And for a guy like Alcibiades, the peak is a very dangerous place to be. His triumph was going to be shockingly short-lived. And it all unraveled over one single mistake. And it wasn't even his. He was away raising money, and a subordinate he'd left in charge disobeyed his direct orders, got into a fight, and lost a pretty minor battle. But that was all the opening his enemies in Athens needed. They blamed him, stripped him of his command, and Alcibiades, fearing for his life, went into exile one last time.
Even from exile, he tried one last time to save Athens. He spotted the Athenian fleet camped in this horribly exposed, dangerous spot. He actually rode to their camp and begged the generals to move to a safer harbor. But their pride, their jealousy, they wouldn't have it. They basically told him to get lost. A few days later, the Spartan fleet attacked and annihilated them, just like he warned.
And that was it. The war was over. Athens had lost. And Alcibiades, the man who maybe could have won it for them, was now a man with way too many powerful enemies and nowhere left to run. He was hunted down in some remote part of the Persian Empire. His house was set on fire, and when he rushed out to fight, he was cut down by a volley of arrows. A violent end for a brilliant, complicated man.
So how do we remember a guy like this? The debate has been raging for more than 2,000 years. Was he a patriot and a genius, like some of the ancient historians believed? Or was he a completely ruthless traitor, like Plutarch wrote? There's even a modern psychologist who diagnosed him, posthumously of course, as having all the classic features of psychopathy.
In the end, we're left with the exact same puzzle Athens faced. Was he a flawed genius that his own city just couldn't handle? Or was he a narcissistic force of nature whose ambition was just too big and too destructive for any one city to contain? The answer, just like the man himself, is still endlessly fascinating.